Okay, so today we start 3 class periods of talking about radio recording and popular music. And I finally figured out what I don't like about this book. It doesn't have much about culture the way we're understanding culture. You guys remember the book is called Popular Communication and Culture, or is it mass communication and culture. So it's talking about mass communication technology, which is, I guess, is why 80% of this chapter is about radio. And then remember, they define culture broadly as society and what happens in it, essentially. So, like in this chapter, there's almost nothing about music, which I'm not a huge fan of that. So what we're going to do today, we're going to trace the technology, and then on Thursday, we're going to start studying more the actual culture, the music. Thursday, I think, is one of the most interesting days of the semester. I don't know, we'll see if you agree. Okay, so the first sound recording technology that we're looking at are cylinders. So these are pre-discs, and you guys know albums and singles are the flat round things that your parents own. Maybe some of you collect records. But before we had those, we had these discs, and the word phonograph, phono means sound, graph means writing. So when you write the sound onto the cylinder, that's why he called it a phonograph. And you can imagine probably how bad the sound quality was. Before this, if you listen to music, it was primarily live in person. So of course the sound quality is good, and you can imagine really early recordings on a cylinder not that good. So the other thing was it was difficult to mass produce because it's round. Because you guys know eventually you're going to get to where albums are pressed and then they just go like that, but you can't do that. You can kind of see the grooves where the sound is played from, and obviously that's not something that can be easily reproduced. So then Berliner in 1887 goes from the things in the last picture to discs. I Googled around, I think this is a copy of one of the first actual records. I think it's in a museum somewhere. You can see the word gramophone at the top, and you can see some dates on there, 1888 to 1890. It was patented in 97 or 87. And it's kind of interesting because you can kind of see, I don't know if you can see it, but right above the hole for how you put it on the record player, it says other patents have been applied for. So this is pre-patented disc technology. The record is played on a gramophone. This is one of the earliest preserved gramophones that we've got. And you probably recognize this for a couple of things. One is you can clearly kind of tell this is a record player with the speaker built in. That's pretty obvious. But the other thing is one of the major labels, man, I have no words today. Image is the dog sitting in front of the cone here, and so the dog is sitting in front of a gramophone listening to the music. So a couple of innovations come out at this time. One, as I said, is now that they've got it flat, they can mass produce these. And you've probably seen, like, the movie that always comes to my mind, I doubt it comes to many of your minds, is Crush Groove. If you haven't seen Crush Groove and you like hip-hop music and culture, you have to watch Crush Groove. It's an old movie, but part of it is about how several rap artists, including Run DMC, they're kind of the feature, are trying to get popular, and they press their own record, and there is a montage, you remember from last time, a montage where they make the record, they bring it to the record production facility, they show it being stamped and put into sleeves, and then they pick it up in a box and they start bringing them to the radio stations. So that image where it shows the technology that stamps the records, you can probably, you've probably seen something that you can visualize that from. The other thing is, at first the discs were one-sided and they went to two-sided, and the revolutions per minute. So one company went, I think the original revolutions per minute was 78. And then one company went to 33 1/3, which we now know is an album. And I think there's about 20 some minutes per side at 33 revolutions a minute. And 45 revolutions per minute is a single, and it's got the bigger hole in the middle, and I think that's 3 and some change per side. Okay, now unfortunately we have to talk a little bit about radio. Actually, talking about radio makes sense not only because this is the music and sound recording and radio chapter, but also because it's important to understand early radio to understand early television. So once we get through this, we'll call back to this a week from Thursday. And I'm giving you like the basic gloss version. This is the chapter I'm probably talking the least about what's actually in the chapter. But essentially, during World War I, the government takes over radio patents because they need that kind of communication to fight the war. And because they develop the technology so much, when World War I is over, they see that it's going to be a popular entertainment and commercial medium. So they realize the potential of being able to broadcast music and news, and also sell advertising on radios. And essentially, this is true because people were used to listening to music, and because of the post-war context, they wanted up-to-date news as much as they could get. So radio fulfilled those two functions. You could get news from the other side of the country or about the post-war situation in other countries from the radio, and you could listen to music. And you can see the number of radios in the home. Over 1 year, it goes up 950,000 radios. That's bananas, right? So you can see radio becomes a mass communication technology in the span of a year, essentially. And the Radio Act of 1927. So the book talks about several pieces of legislation regarding radio, but this is an important one for two reasons. One, radio broadcasting networks can use, but they don't own the airwaves. So essentially what that means is radio companies can use the public airwaves, and the government controls the use of them, which makes radios a public utility. So unlike other channels, for example, movies, movie theaters, movie companies tried to own movie theaters. That's not going to happen with radio. And then the other thing the Radio Act of 1927 did is it said that radio programming and licensing was going to be judged by these factors. If radio programming met the public interest, convenience, or necessity, that's the kind of content that the government wanted on radio airwaves. Another thing about radio is it's the first mass medium where they can sell advertising. And, you know, in theaters, there's some advertising before the movie, but in the 20s and 30s, that's not that common. But radio, it's very easy to include ads in the programming. And if you think about running a radio station, let's say even from 8 a.m. to 5 p.m., that's a lot of airtime to fill where you're not running programs that are 15 to 30 minutes long. So advertising made sense. But first, and kind of going back to the numbers of radios, you can see the radio industry obviously made a lot of money at the start selling the actual devices, the radio. But once everybody had a radio in their home, they had to figure out, okay, what's the next way we can make money providing this service to the public, and advertising was the solution. And you can see there were originally 4 networks. And part of the reason I'm showing you this is because this is the starting point for the television networks. You can see NBC was the first network, and then CBS. NBC opened a separate network called NBC Blue, which they were forced to sell, and that became CBS. And those are the big 3 that television started with, which we'll talk about in a week in another class period. And then there's one more called Mutual, which I guess must have gone away in the 40s. So you're starting to see some of the groundwork for TV being laid in the radio industry. Okay, so we're going to get back to this again in the TV chapter, but once TV becomes popular, radio stations have problems. You can see that during the initial popularity of TV, radio advertising drops over $100 million a year. So the radio industry is forced to try to figure out how can we remain profitable now that people are watching television instead of listening to the radio. And some of you may have seen movies where the kids are sitting in the living room in front of the radio listening to the stories. And so when the TV comes into the house, it's a perfect replacement for that because you still sit in front of it, but now you can watch and listen instead of just listen. And so the popularity of TV starts causing trouble for radio stations. One of the things the book says they do is go local. So instead of having these big broadcast networks where they're all playing the same programming, we've learned this term niche. So radio stations become niche producers, and they focus more on what local folks want. They can sell local advertising. And if you listen to the radio in Atlanta today, you know stations are very specific based on the kind of music and the audience they expect, and that was all prefigured by the popularity of TV. Okay, so now we're going to speed up the timeline a little bit. The next technology that changes the way we listen to music are cassette tapes. And so, I don't know, does anybody have a cassette player? A few people. So I'm old enough to have, this was the primary way to buy and listen to music, and I remember it. I'm kind of like a historian. So a couple of interesting things about cassettes. One is, it doesn't seem like there needs to be a lot of different companies and kinds of cassettes, but cassettes were sold on the length they could record, 30, 45, 60, or 90 minutes. I think cassettes might have gone up to 120. The quality of the cassette, you could pay a lot of money for a high-quality cassette, and then you could get a dozen low-quality cassettes fairly inexpensively. And obviously, you can see from this picture the look. And honestly, this is an example of how quality might be swamped by the coolness of the look. So I remember, and with these cassettes, essentially how it would work is you could see the color and the look of the cassette, and the stickers, a lot of times you would put them on yourself. So for example, some of them were colorful, and that might be a reason to want it. Some of them were see-through, and that was kind of cool. And then I don't know if there's a picture of what I'm thinking of on this one, but some cassettes looked really like high quality and high tech, and that was another reason to buy them. When I was y'all's age, I was a DJ, and one of the things I did is I would make mixtapes for myself and friends, so I spent a lot of time looking at and buying cassettes and listening to them. One thing audio cassettes allowed you to do was what's called home dubbing. And there's a couple of different things about cassettes. So first of all, one thing that I had a friend who would do in Detroit, there was a mix show on Saturday nights by a DJ called The Wizard, or The Wiz. And so when the radio show came on, you had a radio player with a cassette recorder in it, and you could record the radio program, and then he would bring those back. We were roommates in college, and he would bring those back Sunday night, and we would get to hear the latest hip-hop DJing from Detroit, which in hindsight isn't that impressive, but at the time it seemed pretty cool. So anything, and what a lot of people would do is they would have their cassette tape ready to go, and if their favorite song came on the radio, all they would have to do is hit the pause button. It would start recording, and a lot of times you would hear these tapes where like the first 10 seconds of the song is not on there because you're trying to catch it live on the radio and then record it to your cassette tape. So you may record a couple of days worth of songs off the radio, and then you could drive around in your car and listen to it, and that's the way we got our favorite songs without paying for cassettes or cassette singles. Because you have to think about it, now we can make playlists, we can shuffle, it's all digital files, but with cassette tapes, if you wanted to listen to more than one artist at the time, you had to pop it in, it has to start playing, and then you have to pop it out and put the next one in. So if you wanted to mix up music, it was a lot more difficult until dual cassette players came out. So when I made this lecture, this is a semester or two old, I spent a lot of time looking for a picture of what like a mixtape I might have made looked like, and I couldn't, so I just defaulted, and the quality of the picture, if you're a Guardians of the Galaxy fan, you may remember the quality of the music. That's one of the things about the movie. The soundtrack is, a lot of people think, is incredible, and so that's what a mixtape would look like. So you would write, people made titles, and you would write the list of tracks and artists, and so there was a lot of like personality in making these mixtapes using cassettes. The other kind of funny thing about mixtapes is I think this is the first time music was put into a cassette tape to give to somebody you had a crush on or you were dating or whatever. So, and I don't even know if y'all can do that now. Do you make like playlists that you email the link to the person you're interested in? When we were your age, what we would do, if you like somebody or were dating them, you might make a mixtape of all the cool songs that kind of told them how you felt about them or represented your friendship or your relationship. And then people did that on CD, and I don't know if y'all do that or you think it's corny, but okay. And then the other thing about cassette tapes is this is the first time recorded music becomes portable. You all probably know that transistor radios were small enough that you could carry them around with headphones, and you've probably seen movies where the kid is sitting in the classroom listening to the game while he's at school, so that was happening. But this is the first time that your own recorded music becomes portable. And the popular portable cassette player was the Sony Walkman, which does two things, and this now totally changes society. One, the music was portable, as I said, but two, because you wore headphones to listen to it, it was also isolation from other people. Now, when you're on the train, how many people have headphones in? Almost everybody, right? So instead of riding with a bunch of people, and imagine before this innovation occurred, people on trains probably read more, they probably talked to each other, people probably met people on the train more. Now, or like walking down the sidewalk, how many people do you pass headphones in looking at their phone? So this isolation that Walkmans produced really has carried over, and it's the inspiration for iPods, and we're going to go into that a little bit more later. So this is an example of one of the first popular Walkman portable cassette players, and you can see it's got the old school headphones with the foam earpieces, so they didn't even go into the ears or surround the ears. It's stereo quality, as you can see, and then you can kind of see the buttons on the side. And so this is what, and of course they made belt straps for these, so people would walk around with these strapped to their belt with these cool headphones on, and that, like in the 70s and 80s, that was what the cool kids did. But again, I'm realizing one of the things about this class is trying to get you guys really to think about these early technology innovations that come into your life, and just think about how fundamental portable music and headphones are. I'm guessing there's less than 10% of you who that's not a huge part of your life on campus. Walking to classes, going places on the train if you don't have your own transportation, or on the bus or whatever. Living in a dorm room with 3 other people, or in a suite with 3 other people where you want some time without their noise. So this portable isolation technology is huge for society today. And then the next step is digital audio recording. So we go from cassettes to CDs, and there are a lot of advantages to CDs. The biggest one is the sound quality. Cassettes had a little bit of static and some popping. I think I've mentioned before, one kind of cool thing about cassettes is that if the tape broke, you know, Biggie has a line, he rocked the tape till it popped. I'm not going to rap it, but what he meant is the tape breaks, and if you just trim off the sort of broken pieces, you can tape it back together, and if you do it right, you lose that little section of music, but you can keep the tape and listen to it minus that little thing. CDs, you can't obviously do that, so when the CD breaks or it gets scratched, it's done. And eventually, first of all, CDs are read-only, which means you get a CD, you put it in your stereo and listen to it, you can't record it. But then eventually, CD write-only CDs come out where you can record to the CD, and eventually you can pay a little bit more money for read-write CDs where you can record to it, you can listen to it, you can make it so that it's not recordable over. And obviously CDs, and again, so one more thing about cassette tapes, like when I was, I think this was probably college, I walked around in my backpack with a 20 cassette case. So I had the Walkman, the headphones, and 20 cassettes because I was a music lover. So I wanted to have as much music in a day, outgoing places. I wanted to be able to switch what I listened to. So now think about the change from carrying 10 or 20 cassettes to 10 or 20 CDs. With the CD wallets where you just had the CD out of the jewel case, you put it in the little flat thing, And now you can carry, I mean, I don't know if you guys, who really was a CD person when they were a kid? Do I have many? Okay, quite a few of you. And I don't know, I remember people carrying around like 50 and 100 CD holder things in their backpack or having them in their car. You reach into the back seat, you grab it, and you've got like 100 CDs to choose from. So obviously the sound quality, they're lighter and easier to carry, they're more portable. So CDs kill records and cassette tapes, and CDs pretty much take over. And y'all probably remember when you were kids, I don't remember when the iPod comes out. I think it's like 2007. So you guys were probably 6, 7, 8 when the first iPods came out. You probably had a little CD player in your room with some CDs if you were into music. So then the next step is the ability to share those digital files that are on CDs. So most of you know music, digital files, generally, there's a bunch of different formats music can come on, but the most popular format is MP3. And if you make a movie now, it's usually MP4 if it's a Mac. And so file sharing becomes a thing. And Napster is the huge program that brings file sharing to the mass audience. And you may or may not remember, in the internet chapter, there was a distinction between things that ran in the browser and things that ran on the computer. And Napster is an example, and I think the example I gave was email. My work email, there's a web version, but there's also a desktop version that doesn't run in a browser. Napster was the same way. When you got Napster, you would go to the Napster website and download the software, and then you would connect it to the folder that you wanted to share with other people. And so Napster was not a browser app, it was a program you had on your computer. Peer-to-peer means that people share to each other. So essentially how Napster worked was you downloaded the program, you gave it access to a folder, and the best Napster people would give it access to all the music on their computer. And Napster essentially cataloged all of those songs and albums. And then when you connect to Napster, and if I'm connected to Napster, we can see each other's music collections. So when I look for a song, I type in the search tool the song I want, and then it brings up all the copies that are connected to via Napster. And it would even show you sound quality and download speed. So you could look at the Napster list and see how long would it take to get this song, what would the quality likely be like. And so essentially what you were doing is you were seeing, maybe for popular songs, hundreds of people's copy of their song on their computer. And that's what peer-to-peer sharing is. We might come back to this a little bit later. The story of Napster is pretty interesting. But essentially what happens with peer-to-peer file sharing in music is the recording industry goes through all kinds of different legal battles to try to stop Napster. They take Napster to court. You may remember when you were a kid hearing news stories about like a kid at their grandparents' house being on Napster and racking up thousands of dollars in telephone charges, and then the cable company comes after them. So the record industry essentially tried to sue people to stop them from file sharing. And eventually they embraced it. So the first response by the record industry was, no, we don't want file sharing. We want complete control of digital music. And once they realized they couldn't stop it, or it wasn't effective to try to stop it, then they switched to trying to embrace digital formats. And ultimately, the first format that they really all kind of agreed on is iTunes. And of course now, iTunes was originally purchasing the music, right? Songs for 99 cents, albums for $9.99 maybe. But then the obvious next step is streaming. And the thing about streaming is it's switching from ownership to access. So now with Apple Music or with the website, I never remember what it's called, but y'all use. Now with these streaming sites, you can pay a monthly fee and listen to pretty much all the music. Any music you can find, you can listen to. And so it fundamentally shifts. Now think about this from cassette tapes and the way they were portable to streaming and the way it's portable. The only thing that's gotten bulkier in that process is the headphones. So if you don't have the collapsible headphones, that takes up the most room as opposed to the cassette tapes or the CD cases taking up room. Okay, here's a visual from the book. It's kind of weird, but whatever. The reason I put it up there was to show the relative percentage of units sold for the different mediums that music comes on. And you can see streaming is 76% of music. And so this fundamentally changes the way recording artists make money. And some of you may have gotten into, like, I think at one point Chance talked about how streaming works and how you make money off of it. And I think I might have mentioned before, I don't know if I have, so I'll just say it again if I did. All the albums Kanye produced recently were like 6 or 7 tracks. And the reason is because that's the minimum number to be called an album. And when you get complete album streams, you make the most money in streaming. So to ensure the likelihood of streaming the entire album and making it easier and shorter, they made the album shorter. So at this point, we're seeing streaming affecting actual production of culture. And I think you're going to be seeing more artists putting out essentially EPs that are called albums just for the streaming numbers.
Why is vinyl album sales not plummeted like CD sales?
Well, we're going to get to that. Vinyl, and then actually cassette tapes is the other one that's coming back. Those are two that collectors and I don't want to use a term for you all, but you young cool folks, hipsters, okay, somebody else said it, not me, are bringing vinyl and cassette tapes back. And we're going to look at that in more detail in a second. But the one thing I wanted to mention is vinyl never really, once things stabilized, vinyl has been a relatively popular, 10% doesn't seem like much, but music business is $1 billion industry, so 10% is a good chunk. Vinyl was always something people bought and collected. Some of you may know there are a couple of record stores here in Atlanta that have quite a bit of vinyl. Amoeba Records is something on the West Coast. They have warehouses full of vinyl. And they don't even have cassette sales on here, but we'll find out more about that in just a second. Okay, so the last piece, almost the last piece, we're almost done talking about technology, but as I just alluded to, vinyl and cassette tapes have made a comeback. Vinyl's been coming back longer, but cassette tapes are also becoming more popular. And so I think I might have mentioned before, Bandcamp is a site where artists can put their music up. It's usually small independent artists, and they can sell it. And a lot of times the only physical medium you can buy a Bandcamp album or song in is a cassette. And so you might get the cassette mailed to you plus streaming access on the website for $5.99 or $7.99 or whatever. And so cassettes are coming back in popularity, and we're going to watch a couple of videos to learn more about this. So what you want to be listening to for in these videos is some of the reasons why vinyl is coming back or cassettes are coming back, and especially the aesthetics. And so we'll see that as we look at these websites or these videos. All right. Okay.
I really don't know what the magic of vinyl is. It's got so much to it. It's got artwork. It's got songs that you fall in love with. It's got scratches, which makes each record its own. Maybe it's the smell of them. I don't know. When we started the record label, vinyl was huge. In fact, our first releases were only vinyl. So we actually started doing CDs later. But in this music scene, in punk rock, and independent music, vinyl has always been part of music. I don't think anybody really expected the full mainstream resurgence that we've seen. Records that you would never think would be back on vinyl or back on vinyl. To get a new crowd, a new generation of people buying records. In the independent scene, vinyl never went away. The collectability of records has always been constant.
We sold a lot of vinyl before, but as of about 5 or 8 years ago, it was only about 15% of our sales overall, and now it's over 35%. We're 3 retail stores in Berkeley, San Francisco, and Los Angeles. We're probably the biggest record retailer in the U.S. Our LA store, for example, stocks about 250,000 titles. This store may be closer to 200,000, and the Berkeley store, the original store, more like 100,000. We've never had a day where we didn't sell at least 1,000 LPs in a day at the LA store, and close to that here. So we've been selling a lot of vinyl since 1990, when a lot of people were only viewing the CDs.
It used to be maybe 5% of sales, and now it's almost half sales. Our vinyl's gone up 332% in the past 10 years, where CD sales have gone down 90%. Which is, But vinyl really keeps the business alive. I started Pirates Press in 2004, and we make vinyl records and CDs. We make every component of it, from the cutting of the record down to the marketing sticker that gets put on the shrink wrap. As I left college, I got a job for a manufacturing company and learned how fun it was to make records for people, and that when they came out great, the gratification and the appreciation that we got was amazing. And so to be able to give somebody that product and to have them love it is the best thing that I found immediately right out of college. And so I started Pirates Press, and 10 years later, here we are. It's that we've always done records because bands want their album out on records, because they all grew up with records. And it just feels weird if you don't have a record. You want to be able to show someone, look, I made this record. You don't want to show them a computer screen or iPod. Well, look, I'm on. It's no good. Even when records were kind of dead, there were always people, always bands, always artists who wanted to get a record made. And that's where we fit that niche market. And now, today, those bigger labels who aren't used to making records anymore kind of need that service put on a larger scale. So what we're able to do is essentially project manage all their manufacturing, all their vinyl and other things that allow them to focus on what they do now, is
sell the records. And that model really works for the small labels and the small bands as well as it does for the big companies. For all those labels who are running one title a month or 20 titles a month, it doesn't really matter. It's scalable, and that's what's allowed us to grow since the beginning of the company.
You know, it is really hard to get records pressed now. Since we've always done vinyl, a lot of the bigger plants closed down in the 90s. And as soon as major labels started doing vinyl again, now we're back online again. So it's tough for us to get vinyl out. It takes us months to get stuff pressed.
There's certainly a big backup in the supply versus the demand, the pressing plants. And the labels are all kind of backed up, and no one's really built a new pressing plant in place. I know. And I think if someone does, that'll be a sure sign that the market has more life.
The whole industry is bogged down by capacity, with everybody just trying to find old presses and refurbish them, spending kind of ridiculous amounts of money getting old machines in working order. We decided to take the long-term, scalable approach, and we made a new press, and it's been working beautifully for months, and it increased our capacity massively. Our second new press arrived at the factory recently and is being installed. But we'll be able to monitor growth, and we know that as we grow, the quality of the records is going to remain the same. The records themselves are handmade. It's a major difference from a lot of other factories where you have suction cups moving the records from place to place without the assembly line. When we make twice as many records, that also involves twice as many sleeves, twice as many sets of assembly, twice as many boxes, shipping capacity's got to double. We can't just make 20 new presses and turn the key and everything's going to be fine. So we're trying to figure out a way to grow altogether as a company that's going to be sustainable. A year from now, we expect to be making twice as many records as we're making now, and at that point, we'll take a look back and decide if we need twice as many more presses, and we'll just go from there.
It's a very personal thing, People nowadays do not understand the depth of passion people had for their stereo and the record collection back in the old days. And I know it sounds like an old car, but I think a lot of young people are really picking up on what fun it is.
Well, I think vinyl will always be here. I mean, it hasn't died. It should have died 20 years ago. It has to get more popular. It's fun. It's good for vinyl pressing plants. They're killing it.
Okay, so a couple of things about that video. First of all, I just wanted to mention, if you ever get a chance to go to Amoeba Records in LA, it's pretty impressive. It's a huge warehouse, and the last time we went, we probably spent like 3 hours. There's so many records that you can go through. The San Francisco one is multiple levels in this old building, so you go either up this really crappy elevator or you walk up the stairs, and every level has different genres, and so it's a really different feeling to shop in a record store like that than it is to obviously buy music on Apple Music. The other thing is some of the things they mentioned about what makes vinyl popular are the ability to hold the thing, and hipsters came up, and I don't know if I've mentioned this before, but one thing now is people bringing record players to coffee shops or the park or on the train or on the bus and playing records in those places. It's obviously not that easy to move them around, but that's sort of I don't know if it's still going on, but that was a thing at one point. The last thing, what I think is kind of interesting from an industry perspective, is what they said initially when CDs and then digital audio came out. Records were still getting made for small genres, like punk rock is the example of the guy with the orange hair. But now that vinyl is becoming more popular and the major labels are making vinyl albums, the small independent labels that used to be the lifeblood of the factory are now getting pushed to the end of the line, so the pressing plants can make the major label jobs, which are obviously a lot more lucrative. So it's kind of interesting to watch the way economic issues affect the ability to get a piece of culture like an album. So Now, if you were a fan of the punk rock groups on the orange-haired guys label, you have to wait longer because they're at the back of the line behind the majors. I was thinking, so the other thing about records, I don't know if any of you have listened to vinyl, but the needle on the record makes distinctive sounds that make listening to vinyl different. One descriptor people use for vinyl versus digital is vinyl is warmer. And because the digital sound spectrum is compressed, it just sounds different to listen to when you listen to something on iTunes, for example, versus when you listen on a vinyl record. So maybe next time we'll try to get some samples of that so we can hear the difference. But one example of it is hip-hop producers will now include like the scratching and popping sounds as part of the track, even though there's nothing vinyl about the record. It wasn't like the DJ, they're not using vinyl, but they engineer in the scratches and the pops that us old people are used to with vinyl to make it sound more retro and more old school. Okay, so now the first to last thing we're going to look at are the comeback of cassette tapes.
When you own a business, you make a lot of small changes. Cashflow Insight, an online tool from PNC, is another small change that can help.
No, don't buy this thing. PNC Bank, no thank you. Oh, come on. Let's try this one more time.
Here at Blue Point, we don't sweat the small stuff, and neither should you. Oh dear. Fuck it. Sit back and relax. Get toasted.
Didn't expect that. All right, thanks. You're maybe gonna have to watch this on your own. I don't know what the problem is, but okay. So anyway, cassettes are making a comeback. You should watch that video on your own. Somebody let me know, please, if when you try to watch it on your own, if it works or not. Because obviously, if it doesn't work, we need to figure it out. I want you to hear a little bit about why cassettes are coming back. And the industry piece is kind of interesting. Okay, so last thing before we wrap it up, we're now transitioning into actual music. We've looked at some of the key pieces of technology in sound recording and portability and changes in format that have gotten us to where we are today. And now we're going to shift and go back. Actually, on Thursday, we're going to go back and look at blues music. But this is kind of the link to next week. So the rise of popular music, because if you came into class before class started, I was playing popular songs from the 1880s through like the 1980s or 90s, I think. And a lot of it is like old marches, piano. And so popular music, it does not come onto the scene until like the 40s and 50s. So you can see from the PowerPoint, marches and piano songs, show tunes and vocal ballads, and then in the 50s and 60s, we get rock and roll. But the foundation to popular music in the U.S. is the blues. And so we're going to study that next time. And what I wanted to do, we've got 14 minutes, so we're going to spend a couple minutes, assuming this website works, listening to some of the old-timey music. And actually, we'll speed it up a little so we can get through more.
When the saints go marching in, when the saints go my rosary, my